lots of cool things happening at the Miller subdivision. Thanks for sharing all of those different projects with us. Now we're going to be talking about choosing the right plants for the right spots and really being observers of the world around us and the natural world around us in particular. I'm joined by Pat McNeal. Pat is with McNeal Growers, one of the pioneers of growing plants that are well adapted or native to our region, and it's great to have you back on the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's been a long time.
Yeah, it's been a while.
It's good. It's good to see you, Pat.
Yeah.
And this is, on everybody's mind right now is like, how do we deal with all the different changes that seem to be occurring? And when we were talking just a little while ago, you were talking about balancing, keeping things in balance.
Yeah, yeah.
And let's start by talking about that, because we all could use a little more balance in our lives and in our gardens, I think.
Well, you don't want to. You want to make sure that anything that you plant, of course, doesn't, isn't something that isn't going to, live. And our problem here is our such extremes. Mm-hmm. So that balance is hard to maintain when you go from 60 inches of rainfall to 15 inches of rainfall 2 years later. So that's really hard to manage. And the only, I guess the inspiration for that would be, of course, the natural world, because it's over tens of thousands of years, millennia, has adapted to those things. Mm-hmm. And what we need to do is look at the model that looks at those, so we can use that knowledge. Mm-hmm. How do we, transpose that knowledge and use it in our landscapes and around our homes?
Yeah, and you were talking about the old way was that we will force the land to do what we want it to do.
Well, the azalea walk, when I first moved here, was real popular. People would come on the UT and look at azaleas growing in these, but they had to grow them in all these beds that were scattered around the campus. Mm-hmm. And that slowly went away because they realized, of course you can do that. And I guess one of my favorite examples of that, San Antonio has a botanical garden, has a nice display of alpine plants, and they have to keep it refrigerated and it's on a big old thick piece of glass. It's a great learning tool, but it's so resource intensive. It's not like you could do your yard like that.
Sure.
And so what we have to do is look at how can we have a yard that doesn't waste all these resources. And what we learn is that pick the plant that fits the environment, which is completely 180 degrees difference. Mm-hmm. And I think the biggest problem is we're still doing that in a lot of ways in horticulture. Mm-hmm. Horticulture is a science based from agriculture, and all our agriculture is the same way, and eventually we're going to hit that wall too, where we're going to say we can't grow corn the way we used to because we have to put so much resources into it.
Right.
So we're going to see that earlier though, because in a landscape there's no profit from it or something that keeps us going. We just do it because it is around our house, it's in our watersheds, it doesn't make us a profit, so we are going to change quicker to something that saves resources. And now we see the real point of that when you go look at the lakes and see the dead trees and why we need to do that.
Well, I mentioned this notion of being an observer. And this is something I know that you're very keen about, encouraging people to look at the world around them, look in their own neighborhoods, look at the trees that are in your neighborhood as indicators of what should be planted.
And that's a real good observation that you can do in your own neighborhood, is look at that. Because I had a fellow I worked with years ago, and he said, I used to work with aerials looking at vegetation, and from the vegetation they could tell if there was gold ore in the ground, and so they would look for certain plants. There would be indicators of the kind of rock that had gold ore. So I used to think, well, you could do that with the vegetation. If you look at the kind of trees that you have, if you have little short trees, the soil's real shallow. If you have really tall trees, then you're going to have deeper soils. Mm-hmm. And the funny thing about that is that even if you observe that, then you can pick the right kind of plants. Mm-hmm. But if you don't observe it, you can't break that rule either, because I don't know how many people I've worked with that said, I want a big shade tree, and they live on the top of a hill.
Oh, yeah.
And it's just not possible. You know,
Right.
the physical parameters are just not going to limit you to have a little scrubby tree. So I always tell people, just enjoy your view. Don't worry about it. Put an arbor up or something.
Right. And go ahead and plant your live oak,
Yeah.
but it'll be a shrub.
It must be, it'll be an evergreen, more like a mountain laurel or like the shin oaks you have up there, the big evergreen sumacs. So if you observe like places in Austin along creeks like Walnut Creek, you go down the creek, there's walnut trees, there's pecan trees, there's sycamore, big tall trees. So if you wanted to plant a big tree like a magnolia or something that needs deep soil, that would tell you. You can actually judge the depth of the soil by looking at the height of the trees.
And being aware, as you walk around in your neighborhood, being aware of what kinds of trees are there is an indicator. The type of terrain you reference, being on a hilltop here in Central Texas means you're sitting on top of limestone.
Right. And the other part about that is that nature doesn't quite have, we don't really observe that nature has some kind of organization because we don't look at it closely enough. But when you look at it, you see that there's a subtle form of organization there. Plants are in certain places, it's not random. And I learned this by putting out some wildflowers around my place, widow's tears, baby blue eyes, stuff for the shade. And I put them out, and over 10 years, they've reorganized themselves to where they grow best. And so this is sort of the other part about landscaping, is that part of this is that you can't know all the variables about where you plant stuff. And so some things are going to move to the place that they do better. And especially if you do ground covers, you can see that with dahlias or stomodia or some of these other plants, is that you plant them here, and 2 years later they're over there because it's a little more sunny, a little more well-drained. And they'll actually reorganize themselves. But in these tree areas, like if you go on Walnut Creek or you go on Barton Springs, 80% of those plants are going to be the same plants because of the same physical environment. So you can look at those and go, well, what do I plant if I live in an area like that? Well, go and observe inland sea oats and plants like that. You can see that they're going to probably grow really well in your yard if those are the conditions. So you can, it's sort of like 15,000 years of testing has been going on constantly with our climate to find out what grows where. All we have to do is look out in the wild and see that.
And, if there are pockets of native vegetation around, you'll get a pretty good idea. Often what I find, at least I'm a denizen of the central city now, and so when I go to the little green spaces around me, what I find are invader species, not as much as the native as you would expect.
Well, and also you see things like there's a good photograph that illustrates that of an acacia, little fern acacia, on one side of the fence, and then on the other side there's nothing because it gets grazed out. So we can create conditions ourselves where plants thrive and plants don't thrive. And what happens is, of course, we have created conditions where these other plants thrive. And then we got mesquite thriving, and we got prickly pear thriving, and we've got junipers thriving. So we get native and non-native plants thriving in these areas that we've modified through grazing or clearing for building. And so what I think is we've actually created a new habitat, is that the urban environment, if you look at a soils map, it doesn't tell you what kind of soil is in Austin, where outside it does. It just says urban soils undivided, because you can't tell. It's all been mixed and turned. And so what happens is we don't really know, in some cases, what the plant community that would be there naturally, because it's unnatural environment. So what happens is,
it's been so unnatural for so long that it's a distant memory at best.
And then that's why you get ligustrums in there. I always wondered why my weeds grow better than my other plants. And that's why, because the area is disturbed, and they like disturbance. The climax plants, the long-lived plants like live oaks, they don't like that total disturbance as much. And they won't come back like ligustrum will. Ligustrum will come back, or hackberries or some of these they come back so much faster in disturbed areas that they outcompete some of the longer-lived plants like live oaks or hackberry or pecans or sycamores. And that's the difference why that's why it's so much better. They like those conditions that we've created.
Well, And I know you're used to dealing with every level of different folk out there. I mean, from big commercial landscaping companies to
Right.
small mom and pop stores that are buying your plants. But you also talk to homeowners. And as we finish out the conversation here, what would your best advice be for the homeowners? You know, given the fact that we're telling them to be observant and be ready for change, I guess, in a sense.
Right.
You know.
And that's it. Really be adaptable about. I run into a lot of people doing landscape design because I do a little bit of that and restoration. They go, well, I don't like orange, or I don't like, and it's just a preference. And it's
Sure.
like you sort of have to let go with those, and sort of that's the biggest thing. Is it may be that lilacs was your sentimental favorite from
Sure.
Ohio, or I might need to let go of the idea.
Well, letting go is something that I think a lot of gardeners have learned to do the past year or two.
I had to do that when I moved from California. It's
You're right.
These plants won't grow here.
Right. Well, Pat, as always, it's fun seeing you. It's great to have you on the program. And McNeal Growers is your operation.
Yes.
And I know that you're going to be moving out to the Bastrop County area. So best of wishes to you in that.
Great, thanks. Thanks for having me.
All right, good.
It's always fun.
All right. Well, coming up next, our good friend Daphne's on break, but we're going to check in with John Drompool for Backyard Basics.